Gabamalamangil, Balanbun Yalanbo, Wallanjeri Balak, Nirina Magagil, Bill Nicholson. That's the language of the land. That language is called Woiwurrung, spoken here for tens of thousands of years. And today the language is looking for its people because there's no fluent speakers. But I like to start the welcome to country in the language because to me it's the basis of culture. So welcome and greetings. Good day from the Wurundjeri people. My name's Uncle Bill Nicholson. I'd just like to first of all thank the mob or the people behind tonight's very special event for incorporating a welcome to country to kick it off. For thousands of years, it has been a custom based on our law to actually make people feel safe, allow them to conduct their business, share their knowledge. And it's a great sign of respect, which actually is a very important ingredient to feeling welcome, which I'll mention shortly. I'd like to acknowledge our elders past. Any of the mob here tonight, your elders included, we wouldn't be here without them. Their strength, their resilience, their wisdom, their knowledge, their understanding of their responsibility to this land, both for their immediate community and for future communities. That's why we've been here so long. I'd like to, this is a little bit sad to say, acknowledge the mob or the clans or the family groups of the Maribyrnong catchment. They're no longer with us today. And I'd like to acknowledge each man, woman and child that cared for this land, just like my ancestors did along the Birrarung or the Bardang or the Yarra River. I'd also like to acknowledge any cultural leaders of today, all the great Aboriginal diverse cultures throughout what's now called Australia and all the cultures from around the world. To me, one of the real key ingredients to reconciliation is for people to be able to tell their stories in safety, their history, their culture, whatever their values are, whatever it may be. And I really believe with a respectful listening ear, we can build a mutual respect and really move towards something we call in language, Jindi Warabak, which is unity, join and unite, or I guess broadly reconciliation. Tonight, no doubt you're going to hear some deadly storytelling. That's occurred on this land for tens of thousands of years because we never wrote a word down for tens of thousands of years. We didn't have to. We communicated through story. We communicated through dance, ceremony, and through art. I'd like to acknowledge all the deadly people involved in the storytelling tonight. No doubt you really enjoy what you hear. In our culture, we have a creator spirit. The name is Bunjil. Gave us the land to care for, life to enjoy, and the laws to live by. Creating a very efficient culture, a very sustainable culture, a very knowledgeable culture, a very fit and healthy culture, and like I was just yarning about just before, living in park-like conditions through that wisdom. Also, every boy and girl brought up on this landscape were taught to understand we are all personally responsible for each other's health and well-being and also the country's health and strength. And that's unfortunately been forgotten in the last nearly 200 years on Wurundjeri country. I'd like everyone here tonight to understand, because we never handed over our cultural authority or sovereignty to any other power that came to our land, that is still everyone's responsibility. And I'd like everyone to think about what we can all do as individuals and families and community groups and so forth to keep this health, well, to, I suppose, support the health of this country. Because my ancestors knew for thousands of years it relates to your health and it also relates to a more sustainable future. So colonisation or invasion, I'm an educator, so there's 2 points of view for you. You can take whichever one best suits your understanding, but it was heavily affected my people. In 1863, the government only counted 18 of us. So let's learn from the past, let's never let it happen again, and like I said, let's build a mutual respect to build a stronger, respectful community. The Welcome to Country ceremony is a law ceremony. It's like a passport, like today's laws, I guess. We give you vegetation to symbolise you could use our sacred resources, our plant, animal and water. The reed spear was broken to symbolise no one would harm you. We'd sip water and offer it to you as a trust respect symbol. Then we get you to walk through the smoke of burning leaves. And the best way to describe that in a short time is fire is a physical cleanser of this landscape. That's why the English eyes were popping out of their head when they arrived here, and how healthy the country was. And we're coming into fire season very soon. But it's about your spirit. We believe in a spiritual transition, so we do smoke and ceremonies to cleanse you spiritually and to cleanse the ceremony ground. Now the theatre, we're not going to light no fire here tonight, but I'd just like to say to feel truly welcome to this sacred land, respect the people, country and culture is part of the law. And by inviting me here to speak tonight, I feel that respect. So Wiminjika Wurundjeri Biik, welcome to Wurundjeri country, and I hope you all have a great night. So thanks.
Wominjeka. I wish to thank Uncle Bill Nicholson for his warm and fascinating welcome to country, and always wonderful to be on Wurundjeri country. I grew up on Wurundjeri country in Upper Ferntree Gully, and to acknowledge the custodianship and that is strong and enduring. Good evening, I'm Jane Harrison. I'm Black and Bright Festival Director. On behalf of our small but mighty Black and Bright team, I'm thrilled to be inviting you welcoming you here to the third iteration of the Black and Bright First Nations Festival. Black Words Live. Our stories and culture are not relics. They have validity and utility in contemporary life. We have connection and points of view that can enlighten, entertain and educate. This festival, we're bigger, brighter and better than before, with more events over the entire weekend, as well as the number of events that we've already delivered. We had an education day yesterday, our first ever, with schools attending, and a professional development session for teachers and librarians. It's very important to get Black literature into the school system. And so even though we're an arts festival, we realise the importance of talking to schools about Black literature. We've also had a LGBTQI+ forum earlier today, and a pitch black session where writers got to pitch to 9 of the most extraordinary publishers in Australia. So that was wonderful, and there's a buzz with some of the writers who attended that that they experienced today. While the printed program is a guide for the best way to, and I'm forgetting our keynote last night, the extraordinary John Paul Janke, who delivered a very passionate and extraordinarily educative presentation to us. And because we've recorded those sessions, we'll be providing those online across the next few months. I'm a little bit nervous, sorry. I'm a writer. While the printed program is a guide, the best way to keep up to date with any changes in the program, and we have had a few changes due to COVID and other circumstances, is via our website. Please book sessions. That gives us numbers so we can report back to our funders and partners. The weekend is jam-packed with events, with too many highlights to mention here, spanning architecture, memoir, history, poetry, YA and more. You'll hear about the writer's craft and can participate in the Blackfella Book Club or listen to Alexis Wright read from her extensive oeuvre. Black and Bright is always seeking new ways to support our writers, and this year we've partnered with RMIT Culture to provide a 2-week residency at McCraith House in Dramana. The recipient of this year's residency is Claire G. Coleman. Congratulations, Claire. I did want to take this opportunity to thank our partners and supporters. Without them, we wouldn't be able to deliver a festival, and certainly wouldn't be able to deliver most of our sessions for free. major partners are Australia Council, the RISE Fund and the City of Melbourne, while our major partners are the Wheeler Centre, whose support has been immense throughout this process of bringing you the festival. Tonight's event has also been supported by the Wheeler Centre and RMIT Culture, and we thank them with gratitude. I want to thank you also, the audience and readership of Black Books, and it's crucial to our economic sustainability and as a creative industry. That's what this festival is all about, creating opportunities for readers and audiences to engage with Black literature. So please also support the sector by buying a Black book at our partner Readings Bookshop, here in the foyer tonight and throughout the festival at the State Library Bookshop. We're a small but dedicated team. I wish to thank each one of them for making this happen. Veronica, Kiara, Monique, all the way through, and more recently, Jermaine, Therese, Troy, Sarah and Jeffrey, along with all of our volunteers. Ideas are easy, it's the execution that counts. So thank you. I also wish to thank, from the bottom of my heart, the writers and storytellers that we've programmed into this festival for their passion for storytelling and their resilience. We've got an extraordinary program, I think. I was blown away by reading the biographies of each of our participants, and I think you'll learn so much and enjoy so much coming to their sessions. In an era of pandemics, war, floods, fires, police shootings, what can a Writers' Festival do? How can we contribute to a better society? Now more than ever, we need to know each other's stories, to listen with big hearts and open minds. We have knowledge and points of view on all aspects of society, and we need more connection and compassion between us than ever before if we are to change our world. Most of all, during the festival, we need to celebrate our strengths and our survival and our skills and our talents. So that's what this festival is, a celebration. For now and forever, Black words live. Thank you. I do have a statement by the Minister for Indigenous Australians, the Honourable Ken Wyatt, that he would like me to read. Message from the Minister for Indigenous Australians. 2022 Black and Bright First Nations Literary Festival. The Black and Bright First Nations Literary Festival is vital to keeping Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders culture strong, celebrating our creative talent and sharing our stories with the wider community. Congratulations on the team, thank you, behind this year's festival for all their work, and thank you for providing a platform for Indigenous artists and storytellers. This is a huge feat in what continues to be challenging times. This year's festival theme, What's Changed, What Stayed the Same, will provide audiences and attendees with an array of thought-provoking and inspiring activities. I'm sure you'll have many opportunities to celebrate and share diverse expressions of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures. The Black and Bright First Nations Literary Festival is a wonderful example of the contribution that these type of events can make to the economic and cultural fabric of our nation. I've no doubt that the audience and participants will be enthralled and inspired. I wish the festival the best for its 2022 iteration and beyond. I'd now like to welcome to the stage the Minister for Creative Industries, Mr. Danny Pearson, to formally launch the festival. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jane. And I would also like to acknowledge the First Peoples and traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Wurundjeri Wurrung people. And I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and to all First Nations people here tonight. I'd also like to acknowledge Uncle Bill Nicholson for his very warm welcome to country. I've heard a number of welcomes to country by Uncle Bill, and they're always very considered, very thoughtful, and I always learn something from whenever I speak with Uncle Bill. To all the talented writers, artists and performers who are part of this year's festival, everyone with us in person in Melbourne, and those who have tuned in online. Long before Melbourne was designated a UNESCO City of Literature, long before white settlement, the place we now call Victoria was home to a rich culture and tradition of storytelling going back tens of thousands of years. Black and Bright 2022 is an opportunity to celebrate that strong, continuous tradition and the many bold and powerful First Nations writers and storytellers who inspire us today. Writers that bring to life untold stories. Writers that celebrate a deep connection to culture and country. Writers who tell important truths. Writers who imagine the future. If the last 2 years of the pandemic and lockdowns have taught us anything, it's that a great book can turn isolation into something else entirely. Through the written word, we find connection, meaning, adventure, solace, entertainment, and inspiration. Through the written word, we learn about ourselves and each other. Last month, I was lucky to attend the Victorian Premier's Literary Awards and to celebrate and recognise some extraordinary writers. The moment when Veronica Gorry was announced as the winner of the Victorian Prize for Literature is one I'll never forget. Her book, Black and Blue, a memoir of racism and resilience, demonstrates the power of writing to reveal important truths and share vital perspectives we may not otherwise see. And again, that night, there was a sense of excitement in the air, and it was a celebration, and it was incredibly moving to be part of that moment in our state's history. This year's festival is full of such perspectives: urgent, uplifting, inspiring, and surprising stories, told in different forms through a diversity of First Nations voices. Jane and the team have brought together an amazing program, and I congratulate them on their amazing work. Contrary to the enduring image of a lone writer hunched over a keyboard, literature isn't an exclusively solitary pursuit. Inspiration is found in conversation, lived experience, the immense power of storytelling and truth-telling. And it's found in events like Black and Bright, which bring writers and readers together by connecting writers to one another, to sources of inspiration, to opportunities to develop their practice, and to readers. Will ensure that groundbreaking, important, and wildly entertaining stories are told and heard. Last year, together with the Creative Victoria First Peoples Direction Circle, I launched the Creative State 2025 strategy. Our plan to strengthen and grow Victoria's creative industries. This strategy is underpinned by the central principle of putting First Peoples first. And this means embedding First Peoples self-determination in our policy making, our program development, and across our work to make Victoria the preeminent creative state. As we put our strategy into action, we are working with partners that platform First Peoples' voices and leadership within the arts, including organisations and events like Black and Bright. We are so incredibly proud to support this festival and its work to amplify Black voices and provide opportunities for First Peoples writers, artists and creatives to shine brighter than ever before. To that end, I'm very proud to introduce a new work commissioned especially for Black and Bright 2022. Please Put your hands together for Solace, featuring music by James Henry, words by Jackie Shepherd, and images by Stephen Ryle and Brian Andy. Thank you very much.
I love that in this body is someone wise and knowing, so that I can observe, admire, and in the spaces of love, feed the sacred systems of my heart and spirit. I love that in this body sings your inner child, so that in our chanting, we can play, laugh, smile, be goofy and silly, and experience the world with new eyes. Every day, every moment, each new second. A wonder to the eyes of the young and old who share breath within one vessel. I love that in this body is humanity, is you, is me, is the rawness of human truth in all its flaws and its suffering and shame, in its emancipations, in its times of honor and glory, in its destinations too, being. Larger than the physical, beyond human perception of infinite. I love that in this body is nature, Mother Earth, in her might, her miraculous and majestic, her thunder and lightning and torrential rains. In her nurturing, her gentle breeze that lulls the senses, her creation spirit and medicine. Her royal and ancient, past in our present, calcium in our bones, blood through our veins, alive in our organs. I love that in this body is desire, the winds of resistance and pursuit, the oceans of depth and mystery and salt, the sands of shorelines waiting for new tides, the soil and earth which takes our bodies back home, and the cheeky, passionate flame of love, like wildfire, sets alight the yearnings of affection, the urge to surrender, to bathe in the vibrancy and warmth, smoke dancing, weaving together the romances of life. Our spirits rise like ash and ember in the heat of each other's joy and celebration and longing. I love that in this body is you, simply you.
Tingi wala jumbalangs. Hello, friends. I'd like to acknowledge the custodians of country here, the people of the Eastern Kulin Nations. I thank them for their hospitality, and in particular the welcome offered by Uncle Bill Nicholson earlier. I thank them for their care of country. I'd just like to pause for a short moment and remember those lost to us in sorry business in the past little while. Bogle Bear, thank you. I was asked to speak to the topic of what's changed and what hasn't. And when I was told that, the first thing that popped into my head was the old truism that the more things change, the more they stay the same. Still, even a quick glance at the IATSIS map of First Nations reminds us that whatever the answers to those questions about change might be, we always have more than one story. We are hundreds of mobs with 100 million stories. And yet at the same time, the story of being First Nations joins us all. To ask what's changed and what hasn't is to talk of history and power, and to bring up the twin spectres of hope and fear. President Nelson Mandela famously said that our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. So here's a confession. That quote has never really convinced me. Although I have utmost respect for President Mandela, a towering world consciousness, an African leader born to be a king, as well as a man whose life was shaped by many incarcerated decades, a very particular kind of education. I've never been able to believe in our power beyond measure. Maybe I'm wrong. Very likely I'm wrong. I know a lot of people do find strength in that quote. But another famous quote that I connect to more is by the African-American elder and author Alice Walker, who wrote that the most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. The most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. We are hundreds of mobs with hundreds of millions of stories between us, and not enough has changed here. All First Nations know that. We know that our people are unsafe walking the streets, that our darker skinned brothers and sisters in particular have targets on their back from the hour of their birth, when Docs is waiting to snatch them away from their families. We know that anyone visibly black or known to be black is suspect in this prison colony called Australia. We also know, or should know, that home isn't necessarily safe either. Our rates of family violence and sexual assault are far too high. A young Koori woman who had married into my extended family went out and assaulted a cop a few years ago on purpose, because the watch house was a much safer place for her on that particular night than her family home in country New South Wales. We all know that not enough has changed. The invasion of black homes by white authority has never ended. We know that in Yarrabah and Yelgan, just as it is known with sharp and unrelenting grief in Yuendamu. Our black bodies are suspect in the white mainstream. Some of us still have guns on us all our lives. Auntie Tanya Day will not be at NAIDOC Week this year or any other year. Kumanjai Walker will not watch this year's grand final or any other grand final because of state-sanctioned terror. Like African American brother Eric Garner, he can't breathe. His grandchildren will never know him except as a character in a tragedy of invasion and gun violence and pitiless death. The child of the Koori woman who chose the watch house as a preferred place of safety from her violent partner. Her daughter, who's my kinship granddaughter, is being raised by white people because of a child removal system that privileges mainstream culture over loving, extended black families. Despite decades, centuries of agitation and struggle by old people, not enough has changed. I've gone blank. Can I get you to talk, please, sis?
Sure.
Yeah. I'll get you to introduce yourself.
Okay, thanks.
Crystal.
I was just mucking around with my microphone then too, so hopefully that's working. Hi everyone, my name's Crystal McKinnon. I'm a Yamaji woman. I'd also like to acknowledge country and thank Uncle Bill Nickerson for his warm welcome, and also acknowledge Uncle Glenn Shea on the Yentia, whose country I call home, Wathaurong country in Geelong. It's an honour to be here today, so thank you for having me. I was asked to provide a small comment on the role of writing in Black Lives Matter and in the broader Aboriginal justice movements. So to start, I'm going to read an excerpt of a piece that Tarneen Onus-Williams, Mariki Onus and I wrote in the days straight after the Black Lives Matter rally we organised together in 2020 with much support from April Day, Auntie Tanya's daughter, Aboriginal organisations, Aboriginal community and legal and health services, and also the broader community as well. So we wrote that Aboriginal lives and the lives of black and brown people depend on us making a stand. When the lives of black and brown people are violently cut short, it is our moral obligation to say something and to do something. They need our collective outrage. They need us to rally, and they need us to fight. Putting our collective words onto paper, to go on the record, so to speak, was important for us after. If you cast your minds back in Victoria, there was a lot of hate that we were copying in the media at the time. As we put it at the time, The Age decided to publish unfounded claims by a single senior government official that protesters were going to spit on police. Other media outlets grabbed that headline and recirculated it. The Age's retraction and acknowledgement of their mistake did little to undo the damage or the surge of negative commentary building against us and the rally. By that afternoon, all types of violent rhetoric were being levelled at us. The Herald Sun branded us COVID idiots. We were being trolled on social media. Victoria Police and Premier Daniel Andrews held press conferences. We were threatened with fines and investigation if we did not call off the rally. And I'd comment more on that, but this matter is still currently before the courts. When we wrote, they need our collective outrage, they need us to rally, and they need us to fight. The outrage and the fight, these words, this call to action is not new. Since first contacts with colonial forces, Indigenous nations and individuals across what we now call Australia have been in an ongoing fight for our lands, lives, and kin. In Australia, movements like Black Lives Matter, or the demonstrations each year on Invasion Day, or the ones that shut down Melbourne streets protesting ongoing torture and violence perpetrated against Aboriginal young people at youth prisons like Dondale. They're all interconnected, and they are all built upon the efforts of our communities and our families who have resisted and who have fought over generations. In discussing the breadth of this resistance, Professor Gary Foley and I have written together recently that people have utilised a variety of means. Professor Gary Foley and I have written together recently that Aboriginal people have utilised a variety of means for this fight, including warfare, petitions, marches, boycotts, writing, art, music, and the courts. It is a long lineage and history of sovereign activism and protest and resistance. It is found on the streets of Brisbane with mob protesting the Commonwealth Games in 1982, or in Sydney in 1937 at the Day of Mourning meeting, or it can be found in the words of Lionel Fogarty and Jasmani and Udruru Nunukal's poems, in the writings of Kevin Gilbert or Alexis Wright or Melissa Lukashenko, in the performances of Glenn Shea or of Jackie Shepherd, or in Mum Shirl and Marge Tucker's autobiographies, or in Archie Roach and Kutcher Edwards and Phillies and James Henry's songs. As sovereign Aboriginal people living in a place where our homelands continue to be occupied and we are subject to ongoing violence from colonial institutions and their practices, we are born political. We are the embodied resistance efforts of our ancestors who fought for our future lives. Our activism, our political efforts cannot be divorced from our everyday, whether that be as a community worker, an activist academic, an artist, or as a writer. And that is why all of our collective resistance efforts, like our rallies, like our literature festivals, are so big. Aboriginal people show up for each other, we fight for each other, and we care and support and love one another. In closing, protest and activism cannot be divorced or separated from our sovereign, embodied Aboriginal selves. And our words and our actions build these movements for justice, for decolonisation, for change. And decolonisation is indeed not a metaphor, as Eve Tuck and Wayne Yang tell us, and it is instead about land and territory rights and land back, about our futures being built with our Aboriginal sovereignty at the centre. And it is with the artists and the writers, the storytellers, and in our own nation groups' creation and being stories that our future worlds can be and are imagined and they are found, our black and bright worlds. Thank you.
Yoe, too deadly. Thanks so much, Boogle Bear. Uncle Archie Roach sings in his song, "There is a garden, and we are paying for your crimes." He's addressing the colony. It can seem sometimes, as a black fella here, that the gigantic sin of colonisation and attempted genocide is one that we, the victims, are expected to atone for. And it's a cost, as Auntie Lorna Munro has reminded us, that was and remains far too high. We have paid a great price, she has said, and we are still paying today, so don't talk to me about free shit from the government. First Nations have paid for this stolen land in blood and tears and stolen labour and the lives of First Nation children and siblings and aunties and uncles. To them that hath shall be given, and to them that hath not shall be taken away, seems to be the logic of settler colonialism. And yet, we fight. We fight, and sometimes we rise. As Claire Coleman wrote in her recent book, "We are not going anywhere. It is the colony that must leave." We fight. One way of giving up our power is to be fooled into thinking we don't have any, but we have more than one story. Jazz Money, I'll invite you to read from some of your wonderful poetry now, please, sis.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Uncle Bill, for that beautiful welcome, and to all Kulin Mob. And it's just so lovely to be in a room with all you beautiful people. I'm so happy. Even though we're talking, heavy, real stuff, it's great to be in this place with you all. I'm going to read 3 poems addressing the theme of what's changed and what's stayed the same. The first one is called Unprecedented Times. As you can guess, it was written in 2020, because that was what it was, apparently. And as oil spreads across still water, the waves of smallpox blistered bodies could not be stopped. A death begun by the white hand without needing to touch a gun. The times were unprecedented. And flour bags of rationed poison stole whole families of their life. A stitched government insignia, the last image before their clouding eyes. The times were unprecedented. And when the sacrosanct of elsewhere exported their fears of anyone not male, not white, not them, a sickness of the mind snatched the sacred vision of all bodies. The times were unprecedented. And when the angry blacks travelled in 1938 to the place called Sydney to hold signs for a day of mourning, for their human right to dignified existence, the times were unprecedented. And when the first queer victims began to burn with HIV spreading like fire through their cells, abandoned and vilified as we lost the most beautiful of a generation, the times were unprecedented. And to all bodies who have feared their government, the four walls of their house, or a world not designed for them, these times are precedented. Thank you. This one is called Digital Native. I've never performed it sitting down. It's a little bit like story time. Yeah, I'm native. Ones and zeros, digital. Babe, I can tell you about the ways that code and poetry intertwine. All these deliberate interventions. All this data. Big census numbers. Little pixels, long strings. How they count up the natives. And yeah, but who's counting? Ones and zeros, zeros and ones. Do we take spears to the digital frontier? Hear the rattles in the server. Do we rain dance the cloud and ask for the numbers back? Ones and zeros, ones and zeros. How does it feel when the cloud bursts? 1010010. Their 3D printing ceremony now. ... painting 1080 pixels, and the wrap banner image is always stock hands dot in the sand. Because no one wants to pay, but they'll take some cultural credit. PayPal, Afterpay, donate here. Ancestral data bank, sacred in the server. Babe, we've always been in the network. We are the network. Of course it's black the whole way down. Ones and zeros. Yeah, babe, I'm a digital native, but I guess we're all native now. 100101, the binary, it goes on and on and on. Thank you. The final piece I'm going to read is a poem called Sweet Smoke that I wrote. I live in Sydney normally, and while the fight at the Djapurong Embassy was really high a few years back, I couldn't come down, and it was really breaking my heart to see that fight from a distance, and it was so strong and so powerful, and it remains so. And I wrote this poem for the embassy and sent it down as my way of my tiny little drop in the contribution. But I was really, really grateful when that mob welcomed it, and it won some money, so we got to send it down, which was cool. But it's dedicated to the Djab Wurrung Embassy and also to those, more importantly, those birthing trees and all the many, many thousands of lives that have been centred around that place. So, it starts with smoke. It always starts with smoke. Mother's bird at the belly, swollen as the great trees, come to this place, painted and slow with a gasping gift. Canopy medicine to welcome the person on hands and knees, whose new blood makes magic, makes the earth anew. The grunting sweat, almost terror, turns to bliss, as sweet cries wake the bush, wake first eyes. Sweated face becomes pure, like rain, like daybreak. When the world shifts from two set wet heartbeats, the wet orange womb glow, to bright white light, and the gasping bub of daybreak cries, there is smoke. To clear the bush, to cleanse the air, to welcome wrinkled and furled as a new leaf. Sweet medicine in the Coolamon carried wet and green, and old hair and old hands born here too know the way to Ashtai belly knots. Clever hands don't forget this place where life begins. Tell it to the bubs to pass on to theirs. When strangers come, when other trees fall, here is a vast hollow medicine tree. This is where life begins. A tree so great, a memory so long, can feel the way the air has changed. Hard rivers have formed in this bush, black, flat tar, where great steel fish swim, smoke turned dirty. And the river of destruction comes closer. White hands, white hats, white clipboards avert their gaze from her, mark on the maps to bring death here, to a place of life. So it starts new, with smoke and familiar campfire, sweet smoke. Textures change and so do some tongues, but the old words remain. Medicine remembered, fires built the proper way. She waits, she sighs, remembers the thousands of hands she birthed here, and sees them return, carrying ancestors, carrying bubs, return with smoke to keep her safe. Thank you.
Thanks, Jess. Oh, the stories that belong to trees. Could be here all week. We have more than one story. We are more than our traumas, which are manifest. If we fail to see what black people and our staunchest allies have achieved over painful decades, then we dishonour those efforts. First Nations people have won much by ongoing effort against massive odds, and we need to remember these achievements lest we forget that we are sometimes powerful and that we have forced big differences in the space of even one lifetime. All over Australia, we run our own community health services. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander services. There are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander media organisations like Karma, like AAA, like Kin FM, bringing our voices in our own languages to mob across the continent. More of us each year excel in mainstream education. More of us have leaving certificates and university degrees, and growing numbers of us have the fundamental literacy that's a ticket to building a better life. More of us are learning our own languages and returning to cultural education to better understand our country and ourselves. First Nations people have fought for and won legal services, land councils, tertiary entry schemes, equal pay for people who until the 1980s were paid less than whites on Palm Island and in other remote settlements in Queensland. Scholarships in a large number of fields. Land rights legislation in the Northern Territory has returned control over large tracts of country to traditional owners, although of course the intervention has interrupted that. The Homelands Movement, anti-discrimination laws. We have First Nations members of Parliament in most states and territories and in most political parties. Whatever you think of his politics, the Indigenous Affairs Minister is a First Nations man. The Anawan Nation, on a smaller scale in northern New South Wales, recently raised enough money, much of it off mainstream, to buy back 600 acres of land that they'll use to teach kids language and culture. They own the land outright. Freehold land, 600 acres of beautiful forested country with good water, in a campaign that only began a few short months ago. I'm told Palawa Mob may have secured private philanthropic funds to build their own genocide museum. As Sister Anita Heiss has written in Billa Yarra Dungalungdere, a statue of Wiradjuri heroes, Wiradjuri men including Yarri, has pride of place in Gundagai. The statue remembers and pays tribute to the local men who saved scores of lives in the flood of 1852. On their own, each of these things might seem small, but they are also real, concrete achievements. Look at the back pages of the Koori Mail. Each week there are literally hundreds of jobs, most in First Nations settings that never existed until black people fought for those services and those jobs to exist. And in a country where we were never intended to become as literate as the colonisers in English, let alone take control of our own narratives, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island authors and filmmakers and songwriters are coming into prominence. We are becoming acknowledged as critical to the stories this modern nation tells itself. In the past decade alone, black authors have won 2 Miles Franklin Awards. Alexis Wright has won the Stella Prize with Tracker, and there are currently 5 First Nations authors on a short list of 12 for this year's Stella Prize. I know at least one of them's in the audience today. The New South Wales Literary Prize for Fiction has been won by Tara June Winch with her novel The Yield. The Queensland Literary Prize for Non-Fiction has been picked up by Bachelor author Fiona Foley for her book Biting the Clouds, about the role of opium in the oppression and enslavement of Aboriginal people in Queensland, colonial Queensland. And of course the recent Victorian Literary Award that was won by Auntie Ronnie Gorrie, who's here tonight. There's a lot more accolades. And it's not so much that the awards matter, it's what they represent, which is that others are finally paying attention. We've always known what First Voices have to offer, that we are privileged to belong to the elder culture of the planet with all that that implies for learning and for global leadership. Now others are at last beginning to listen and valuing our perspectives. Not enough has changed, and there are more black filmmakers and musicians than I could possibly name appearing on Australian screens as well as around the world. No writers' festival can get away with programming 1 or 2 token black authors anymore. When I attend festivals, there's too many mob there that I don't get to talk with because there's simply too many of us at too many different panels doing the work, the never-ending, necessary work of growing up this country. Brother Wesley Enoch has run the Sydney Festival, one of Australia's premier cultural events. Marga Bala continues to publish stunning work, punching well above its weight, as do Blackfella Films and Bunya Productions, Ilbajerry Theatre, and a host of other First Nation creative organisations bursting with energy and ideas to turn this joint around. It was unusual in the 1980s to see Uncle Kev Carmody and Paul Kelly collaborate on From Little Things, Big Things Grow, but it's increasingly normal. Knowledge is now being embraced by more and more non-Indigenous artists, sometimes in an exploitative or cynical way, yes, but also often in collaborative ways that reflect the beginning of a real change in attitudes, an increasing understanding that we were always here and that we learnt some shit in the millennia that our civilisations flourished here before Cook. I'll invite Uncle Glenn to talk now from Alexis Wright's early book, Grog War. Please, Uncle.
Chapter 1. Old people didn't drink like that. Beat the Grog meeting, 15th of July 1986. There are nights like no other in the arid landscape of Tennant Creek, a place where more stars than you could see anywhere on earth shine across the sky so brightly and so close, where you could imagine that if you looked up long enough, you could reach up to heaven. And the leaves of the conkerberry and the wild orange glow from the moon moving towards the western horizon. The light from so far away strikes the trunks of bloodwood and turpentine to find soft hues of grey and white and brown. Your eyes can be guided by trails of ants endlessly on the move over the warm earth of red soil on the banks of silent creeks, laden with tufts of dried Mitchell Plains grasses. In among the tussocks and hammock grass plain outside Tennant Creek is the camp of old Jacamara, Mickey Nothing. His camp consists of pieces of the surrounding bush and bits of corrugated iron just about level with the tips of the fresh spinifex spears. Whenever the humbug of grog catches up with him, he can disappear just like that. They say that this old man can be there 1 minute and you look again and he is gone the next. His camp is in the open for warmth. He can look out in any direction while a light breeze slides over the grass top to offer him warmth for as long as the sun shines during the winter months. I have always been a bush man, and all my life I have lived the bush, Mickey Nothing explained. He cares little about the commerce of money and whitefellow law of Tennant Creek. He saw how all that came and plonked itself onto his country. Old men like Jacamara come from a strong law from the land where he sits, as it has always been, where law is learnt, and where he is highly respected in being one of the important men in traditional law all around these parts of the country. In the rocky hills surrounding the outskirts of Tennant Creek live the old people. These are the spirit ancestors of the Warramungu people whose traditional lands include Tennant Creek. Sometimes they are seen walking around these hills. It is believed the old people come into town whenever they are upset and chase the traditional owners. The Warramungu believe that when the ground is broken, as in the case of the building of the Marianne Dam, which was done without any consultation with them, many Aboriginal people die. Or when the town council moved one of the pebbles from a sacred site, a nest of eggs of the Dreamtime serpent, for a monument in town, many Aboriginal children were bitten by snakes. Mining is no good. Kathleen Napananka Fitz is a senior lady and one of the main traditional owners of Tennant Creek. She is also the main #1 woman singer for her traditional country. No good for digging holes. For kids, because they get sores. There was nothing first. That is what happened when they started Pecco Gold Mine. It was really bad. All the kids had sores in those days when the gold rush was on. The old people being tell them off. And it is believed that there might be a link between the detrimental use of grog as an instrument of harm to Warramungu and the desecration of the resting places of their spiritual ancestors by the Papulangi, the white people.
Not enough has changed. When I was very young, the general Queensland consensus was that First Nations people were all dead, or if they were alive, they were living far beyond the black stump. If you turn on the ABC today, you'll see which country news broadcasts are happening from. A symbolic gesture, yes, but symbols matter. Nobody watching the national broadcaster today could be unaware that they are on contested land with living Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander custodians. I was told decades ago by a Brisbane elder that we live not at peace and not at war, but in a state of undeclared truce with Australian governments. Polls came out a little while ago, and those polls showed that more than half the Australian population supports a shift in that status via a move to treaty. Whether it's treaty or treaties, and whatever the form of that treaty or treaties takes eventually, it's undeniably significant that more than half the Australian population now sees treaty as something that can and should be accommodated. Not enough has changed, but these changes are significant nonetheless. If we ignore the changes that old people fought for or minimise them, then we risk validating the racism that serves the colony. When we fail to acknowledge our wins, the things that political action has brought us, then we risk colluding in the genocidal myth of our hopelessness and helplessness. We must refuse to fall into the trap of being defined by the very worst that is done to us. The most common way people give up their power is to believe that they don't have any. The more things change, the more they stay the same. And some things haven't changed one iota and never will. Our belief in our culture as a force for good, as a sane response to the challenge and gift of being human in this place, hasn't changed. deep reverence for our true elders and for their wisdom, built with genius over many generations, too many generations to even begin to count. That hasn't changed. Our determination to live as cultural beings, whatever gets thrown in our way. Our unkillable love of country. The call of Corumburran the magpie and the sight of Mibin soaring wedge-tailed over mountains and rivers. The beauty of the dawn sun touching a mob of grazing kangaroo and the silver flash of the mullet beneath a breaking wave. That love of country will never change while we walk the earth. Our joy and pride in our families and our own people, whoever we say our people are. Who of us could see Ash Barty triumph at the Australian Open and not feel pride in that young Koori woman's strength and humility? Or Paddy Mills repping Torres Strait mob on the other side of the globe, or Auntie Ronnie Gorrie telling her unvarnished truths and smashing down barriers as fearlessly as she does. Not enough has changed, but the joy and pride we share in black excellence will never change. I said at the start that we have 100 million stories, but that one big story holds us together, the story of being Indigenous in this place. I worry when I see young people or newer people thinking sometimes that what brings us together as mob is the undeniable fact of First Nations oppression, or that oppression is the same thing as Aboriginality, which is another problem for another discussion. But there is an alternative. There always has been. We could listen to the colony and believe that tired old yarn that our story is one that shatters with their arrival, be that arrival in 1788 or 1824 on the Maiwar or 2022. Or we can put that yarn aside and remember another one, the law story of the giant spirit being the Waram, or rainbow serpent, who crisscrossed the continent, shaping rivers and valleys and mountains, embodying sovereignty wherever it went, powerfully making change from Noongar lands to Gadigal country, everywhere the serpent travelled until it returned into Mother Earth. My sister from up north, my Yolnu Yapa from Yirrkala, a woman of few words, told me once that despite our superficial differences as different mobs, that we are all one. We're of one blood, she taught me, because of that vast serpentine journeying above and within the earth, because of an underlying metaphorical truth of connection and creation which has never changed and can never change. The serpent binds us as kin, she told me, as people with responsibilities to each other, to care for and nurture ourselves and our families wherever we originate on this continent. And my sister, my Yapa, she fixed me with a gaze when she told me this. That snake, she told me, that snake went everywhere. Thank you. Please thank Uncle Glenn, Jazz Money, and Auntie Crystal McKinnon. That's it for tonight. I believe there's drinks in the bar. Thanks for coming.